Good day, future CPA. I am Lindsay from the group of Hiraya and welcome sa part 2 ng ating lesson about lease. So, konting recap sa part 1. So, lease ito ay rent sa layman's term and may two parties involved dito, the lessor and the lessee. Last time, we tackled about accounting for lease sa side ni lessee and ngayon, we will be discussing the accounting for leases sa side naman ni lessor. Accounting for lease by lessor. Si lessor, pwede siya makapamili ng accounting na gagamitin niya sa lease. Pwedeng operating or finance lease, depende sa kung ano talaga yung nangyayari. Unlike kay lessee na based sa discussions of part 1, finance lease ang gagamitin unless merong exemption. Classification of lease by the lessor. Operating lease ang gagamitin ni lessor if ever na yung risk or yung possible losses due to uncertainty ng event, and yung rewards, which is the expectation of profitable operation over the asset's useful life na underlying assets ay nakay lessor pa rin kasi hindi naman napasa sa lessee. Kahit inuupahan ni lessee ang underlying assets, hindi substantially all ng life, cost, risks, and reward ay mapupunta sa lessee dahil in the end, si lessor pa rin ang owner ng assets kasi nga rent lang and hindi naman binibenta. Unlike sa finance lease na ipinapasa na ni lessor ang substantially all ng risk and reward ng assets kay lessee. Sa lease, pumapasok dito ang principle ng substance over form. Substance over form means na if ever magkaroon ng conflict or hindi magtugma ang substance at ang form, substance palagi ang mananalo dahil ito ang totoong nakikita at nangyayari sa lease. Magfo-fall sa operating lease if yung case is pareho ang substance and form. Example is nakalagay sa contract or form na lease ang napagkasunduan ng lessor and lessee and yung substance is lease talaga ang nangyayari. While in finance lease, magkaiba ang form sa substance. Finance lease nga ang gagamitin if the substance is not equal to form. So here's the indicators na finance lease ang gagamiting accounting ni lessor sa pagre-record ng underlying asset. First, if may transfer of ownership at the end of the lease term, dito hindi na isasauli ni lessee yung assets kay lessor dahil pagkatapos ng lease term, magiging kanya na. Therefore, substance is different sa form. It is not lease dahil ang substance ay sale, although lease ang form. Example is yung parang rent-to-own na bahay. Nirerentahan mo lang siya pero at the end of the lease term, sa iyo na yung bahay. Second, there is a bargain purchase option. When we say bargain, ito yung bentahan na bagsak presyo talaga or naka-sale. And yung purchase option is pwedeng bilhin ng lessee yung assets kay lessor. Example is yung assets na may present value na 1 million. At the end of the lease term, 200,000 na lang yung value niya. And then, sabi ni lessor, pwede lang bilhin ni lessee yung asset for 50,000. There is a purchase option. And probable na bilhin ni lessee yung assets since bagsak presyo na siya. Wala mang transfer of ownership during the lease term pero bibilhin naman ni lessee yung assets dahil bargain. Therefore, in reality, si lessee ang nagmay-ari ng assets at hindi si lessor. Substance pa rin ang nananalo over form. Third is lease term is at least 75% of the useful life of the lease assets. Means majority ng useful life ng assets ay si lessee ang gumagamit at hindi si lessor. Example is yung asset na may 10 years na useful life. Then, 7.5 years ang lease term na napagkasunduan without the transfer of ownership or bargain purchase option. Sa form, si lessor ang may-ari but in reality, si lessee dahil 75% ng buhay ng assets ay siya ang gumamit. So, sa side ni lessor, ititreat niya na ang assets as finance lease. Next, present value of lease payment is at least 90% of the fair value of the lease assets in the inception date. Meaning, yung present value ng lease payment ay equal to substantially all of fair market value ng underlying assets. So, paano yon? Diba sa start ng contract, may fair value price na napag-usapan si lessor and lessee. Pwede nang computein ni lessor ang mga value na ibibigay ni lessee. Example is may 1 million value ang assets, then may lease payment na 180,000 annually sa loob ng 5 years. Then, na-convert ni lessor na at the end of the lease term, 980,000 na lang yung value ng assets at at the end ng term, halos equal na ng payment yung fair market value. So, pag lahat ng ibabayad ni lessee ay equal or 90% na ng fair market value, then parang binili na niya din yung assets pero in reality, isasauli niya pa rin. So again, substance over form. And last, Lease assets is of a specialized nature that only the lessee can use it without major modification. Inception and commencement of lease. Inception date. Ito yung date whichever is earlier sa date ng lease agreement, which is yung date na nagkaroon ng kasunduan, and yung date ng commitment, again, whichever is earlier. Sa commencement date naman, date kung saan si lessee ay entitled na to exercise the right of use ng assets. Sa initial recognition ng assets, dito may entry na i-record. Sa commencement date, nire-recognize ni lessor ang lease receivable na equal sa net investment. Dito, tina-transfer na ni lessor kay lessee yung substantially all ng risk and reward ng assets. The lessor de-recognize the lease assets and recognize a finance lease liability. So, sa net investment ng lease, dito dinidiscount using interest rate implicit in the lease yung gross investment. Then, yung gross lease receivable, ito yung lease payment na nare-receive ng lessor under finance lease and any unguaranteed residual value sa lessor. And yung difference ng gross and net investment ay tinatawag na unearned finance income. Lease payments, same lang to sa payments by lessee na na-discuss last topic. Pero i-emphasize natin yung may guaranteed residual value dito. Guaranteed residual value refers sa additional payment na ibibigay ng lessee after ng term, basis sa financial commitment sa part ng minimum lease payment ng lessee. Discount rate. Net investment ay measured using interest rate implicit in the lease. Sa case ng subleases mamaya, pwedeng gamitin na intermediate lessor yung discount rate used for head lease if hindi determinable ang interest rate implicit in the lease. Subsequently, minimeasure ang net investment in the lease through amortized cost. Finance income is kinocompute using the effective interest rate method and then recognize a profit or loss. Example, on January 1, 2000X1, ABC Company leased equipment to X, Y, and Z. So, yung cost of equipment is 303,735. May useful life na 5 years, lease term is 4 years, may annual rent payable at the end of each year na 100,000, and may interest rate implicit in the lease na 12,000. So, analyze natin. Finance lease ang gagamitin since 80% na dahil 5 years ang useful life at 4 years ang term. Then, major part na ng lease term yung useful life ng assets. So, here's the solution. To get the gross investment in the lease, we just multiply the fixed lease payment na 100,000 sa lease term na 4 and we will get 400,000. Sa net investment in the lease naman, we multiply the fixed lease payment na 100,000 sa present value of ordinary annuity of 1 at 12% and 4, which is 3.03735, and we will get 303,735 and get the difference of gross investment na 400,000 and net investment na 303,735 to get the unearned interest income na 96,265. Initial direct cost, ito yung cost na na-obtain sa transaction na may kinalaman sa completion ng mga service agreement tulad ng lease. Example nito is kung commission and legal fees. Classification of finance lease by the lessor. Kinaklasify ni lessor ang finance lease as first, direct finance lease. Ito yung lease kung saan nag-a-acquire lang din sa lessor ng underlying assets para iparent sa lessee with the intention to generate income through interest. Example is yung bumibili ng car sa lessor para iparent. Ito yung common lease na nakikita natin. And yung sales type of lease. Dito, si lessor talaga yung nag-manufacture or dealer ng assets na ipapalis, wherein may option sa lessee if bibilhin niya yung assets or ililis niya lang talaga. Ina-account ang sales type assets na tulad ng direct finance lease, except sa part na nagre-recognize kasi si lessor ng sales revenue, cost of sales at gross profit at the commencement date dahil siya yung manufacturer or dealer. We measure sales revenue using the net investment of the lease and yung fair value of assets kung ano yung mas bababa sa kanilang dalawa. Sa cost of sales, ito yung amount equal sa cost or sa carrying amount ng assets if magkaiba, less sa present value of an unguaranteed residual value. Then makukuha natin yung gross profit when we get the difference between revenue and cost of sales. Residual value, ito yung value na matitira sa assets after ng useful life or lease term, also known as salvage value. Sa accounting for lease ng lessee, ina-account niya lang is yung guaranteed residual value, while sa lessor, ina-account niya yung both guaranteed and unguaranteed residual value, Why? Dahil binabalik yung assets kay lessor after ng lease term. Meaning, si lessor ang magtitake ng benefit, and if ever naman na at the end of the lease term hindi na isasauli ni lessee ang assets kay lessor, walang i-account na residual value si lessor dahil ang in years of benefit ay na kay lessee. Ang amount ng gross investment, net investment, and unearned interest income ay same lang whether guaranteed or not. Ang pinagkaiba lang dito is if guaranteed ang residual value, ang present value nito ay added sa sales, while if in unguaranteed naman, deduction sa cost of sales. Lease modification, ito yung pagbabago sa scope ng lease na hindi naman part ng original terms and condition ng lease. Depende sa nature, ina-account siya as separate or the measurement or the recognition of the net investment in the lease. Separate lease if yung parehong scope and consideration sa lease ay nag-increase due to the addition of right of use ng assets and walang adjustment na nangyayari dito. And kapag non-separate naman, the accounting depends on how the lease would have been classified had the modified terms been in effect at the inception date. Operating lease ang gagamitin if wala namang transfer ng risk and reward ng underlying assets sa lessee. Nire-recognize ng lessor yung lease payment as income by the use of straight line basis over the lease term. Sa side ng lessor, yung accounting for operating lease is same lang sa recognition exemption na available sa lessee. Kinakapitalize ng lessor yung initial direct cost ng carrying amount ng underlying assets at yung cost ay nire-recognize as expense over the lease term, habang yung ibang cost na ini-incurred sa earnings ng lease income including yung depreciation cost ay nire-recognize as expense sa period na na-incur ito. Sa depreciation, yung lease assets mananatili siyang assets ng lessor. Then yung lessor, itinutuloy niyang i-depreciate yung assets. Under naman ng operating lease, yung lessor hindi nire-recognize kung kahit anong finance lease receivable. This bonus received is recognized as unearned rent income and to be amortized over the lease term. Advanced rentals ay kinukonsider as unearned income. Nire-recognize lang na income kapag na-earn na. Nire-recognize ng lessor yung na-receive na security deposits mula sa lessee as payable na measured as an amortized cost financial liability. So example, January 1, 2001, lessor enters into 3-year operating lease of equipment. The annual lease payments payable at the end of the year as follows. Noong 2001, merong 8,000, 2002, 12,000, 2003 is 14,000. So yung first 6 months daw ng rent is free. To get the annual lease income, unahin natin yung 2001. Yung 8,000 multiplies sa 6 which is the first 6 months ng lease na rent-free, then divide sa 12 months. By that, makukuha natin yung 4,000. Then, add lang natin yung 12,000 sa 2002 and 14,000 sa 2003 and we will get 30,000 total lease payments divided by the lease term including yung rent-free period na 3 and the annual lease income is 10,000. And dito yung magiging entry natin. Next na tayo, dito modification ng operating lease is na-account siya as a new lease from the modification date or kung kailan siya na-modified as new. Next is yung prepaid or accrued lease payments relating to the original lease ay nire-record sila as payment for the new lease. Lease of land and building, dito ina-assess dito yung classification of finance and operating lease separately. Since indefinite ang life ng land, hindi na-apply dito yung 75% criterion. Sublease, ito yung pinaparent ni lessee sa third person yung underlying assets na nilease niya sa lessor. Illustration ng sublease. On January 1, 2001, Entity X enter into 5-year lease of building or the head lease from Entity Y, the head lessor, for an annual rent of 100,000 payable at each year. May remaining useful life na 20 years and may interest rate implicit in the lease na 12%. Entity X uses straight line method for depreciation. To get the initial measurement, multiply lang natin yung 100,000 sa 3.60478 na present value of ordinary annuity of 1 at 12% and 5. And we will get 360,478 na gagamitin natin to debit right of use asset and credit sa lease liability. Subsequent measurement is through amortized cost. We have 100,000 payments. To get the interest, kailangan lang natin i-multiply yung present value sa interest rate. Sorry, that's 12% po. And para makuha yung amortization, we We'll get the difference of payments and interest. That's the process hanggang sa mag-zero yung present value. Sa depreciation, yung cost na 360,478 ay i-divide lang sa lease term na 5 to get the annual depreciation of 72,096. And ito yung entry natin as of December 31, 2001. The presentation of underlying assets subject to operating lease ay pinapresent sa statement of financial position, sales and leaseback transaction. Dito si seller nagbenta ng assets kay buyer, then si seller release niya din yung binenta niya afterwards. So, may sale and lease transaction na dapat i-recognize. Si lessor becomes the lessee and the buyer will be the lessor. Sa illustration for sales and leaseback, on January 1, 2001, Entity X sells a building to Entity Y and simultaneously leases it back. So, yung building na may fair value na 1 million, carrying amount na 800,000, remaining useful life na 10 years, lease term na 5 years, annual rent payable at each year end na 100,000, and implicit interest rate na 12%. Dito, yung sales price ay equal sa fair value na 1 million. Seller and lessee accounting, first step is to determine the lease liability. Yung fixed lease payment na 100,000 ay multiply lang natin sa PVOA of 1 at 12% and 5 na 3.60478, and we will get the present value of lease payment na 360,478. Step 2 is to get the right of use assets. Para naman makuha yung amount ng right of use assets, yung carrying amount is imumultiply sa amount na makukuha kapag dinivide yung PV of lease payments sa fair value ng assets. So, 800,000 multiplied by 360,478 over 1 million is equals to 288,382. For the gain or loss, yung carrying amount of 800,000 less sa 288,382 na right of use retained by seller or lessee is equals to 511,618. Then yung 1 million sale price less lang sa carrying amount na 800,000, may makukuha tayong total gain na 200,000. I-multiply lang sa 63.952%. By that, we will get the gain recognized portion na 127,904. For that, we need to debit cash na 1 million, right of use asset na 288,382. Then credit sa building na 800,000, lease liability na 360,478, and then yung remaining balance on debit and credit, which is 127,904, ay i-credit sa gain. Under naman ng buyer lessor, sa purchase transaction, kapag ang entity classifies the building purchase as PPE, ang re-record sa journal entry is debit building and credit yung 1 million amount ng cash. This transaction, none of the indicators of finance lease is present. Walang transfer of ownership, bargain purchase option, and other indicator. Then, yung lease term ay meron lamang 50% ng useful life ng assets. Paano nakuha yon? So, yung 5 years is divided by 10. Yung lease is classified as operating lease. Entity Y will recognize the lease payments as lease income over the lease term. And that ends our discussion for the leases part 2. Isang pagbati mula sa grupo ng Hiraya, bunga ng pangarap, hangarin at pag-asa. Salamat sa pakikinig. Paalam!